Hey, what's going on everyone? I'm Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here. And today we finally get to talk about one of our favorite fighting game companies, Capcom, with another one of their mashup fighters that a lot of people seem to have very divisive opinions about. Granted, there might be some legitimate reasons for this, but at least together, let's find out what this game is all about. More specifically, let's just dive into this cavalcade of Capcom madness. Capcom Fighting Evolution was released on the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox back in 2004. It originally was made for the arcades, entitled Capcom Fighting Jam in Japan, but came out for consoles a few months later under the new name. This crossover fighter brings together 5 different Capcom series into one big brawl, similar to what we see with other versus style of games. However, unlike some of the more popular crossover titles, Capcom Fighting Evolution has a rocky history. But before I get into any of that, what games and fighters are we seeing in here? The game features 3 different styles of Street Fighter games, including Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and Street Fighter Alpha. But in addition to that, we also get to see fighters from the Darkstalker series, which is pretty cool. But the one that would really throw everybody for a loop is the inclusion of Red Earth, a fighting game from 1996 that only ever saw one title. It's a fantasy-themed fighting game that runs on the same hardware as Street Fighter 3. A strange inclusion indeed, but I'm not opposed to seeing lesser-known series get highlighted here. Much like the Capcom vs SNK games, there's no real story here per se. All of these fighters are kind of thrown together to fight one another, with a bunch of fan service here and there. But does that mean that Capcom Fighting Evolution is just as good as any other popular crossover from Capcom? Well, let's not get too hasty about that. Okay, getting together a bunch of different Capcom franchises for one big mashup is kind of cool in of itself, and I think that some of the selection of games that we got to feature in this one, even though it's more heavily geared towards Street Fighter, it's still okay because we get to see stuff like Darkstalkers and something unique like Red Earth. Granted, personally for me, I would have loved to see some other Capcom franchises make it into this, more specifically rival schools, but for what we have here, it's totally fine, at least, fulfilling the idea of mashing up different Capcom franchises. It doesn't always work, especially because just some of the roster selection is kind of a little bit weird. Like, for whatever reason, why do we have Chun-Li representing Street Fighter 3 or Third Strike when she first appeared in Street Fighter 2? Like, to me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I would have chosen a different character from Third Strike, like Q or something like that, in order to better represent that roster of characters, or at least kind of mix things up a little bit. And the same thing also goes for Darkstalkers, the same thing could be said for Street Fighter Alpha. I don't know Red Earth that well, I never really played that game back from when it was back in the day, but even so, from the Street Fighter stuff, the things that I know, I would have mixed things up just a little bit. Now I say all this with one little extra caveat. If you didn't know, this game was actually going to have a couple characters from the very first Street Fighter game. Yeah, the one that really sucked before Street Fighter 2 came out. We were actually going to get 3 characters that were completely cut from the game, including Eagle, Retsu, and a young version of Sagat without his scar. Personally, I would have loved to have seen that. That sounds like it would have been awesome, and it would have kind of, bigged up the roster just a little bit. But because of time constraints, we didn't get this whatsoever, and that sucks. But even with me saying all of that, a lot of the problems that people have with this game come from its gameplay specifically, and let me prep myself because there is a lot to dive into here, and you're gonna want to sit down for this one. Now here's where the rubber hits the road with this game. The biggest problem comes from how Capcom approached the fighting system, which, to be frank, is just a copy and paste of every game's fighting system for every game that's highlighted here. There is no centralized or focused mechanics here whatsoever. Yeah, I'm not even kidding. Every character retains their fighting style from the systems of their own respective game. This means that you could have the Street Fighter Alpha system against the Third Strike fighting system, or the Darkstalker mechanics going up against the mechanics of Street Fighter 2. The problem with this isn't just the balance, it's also a huge problem with consistency. I'm all for variety of fighting styles and unique mechanics, but when there's a lack of a grounded system that is universal to everybody on the roster, things just turn out to be a real mess. But that's not my only problem here. The other issue that I have is how the matches are structured. Matches are done with a 2 vs 2 format, where a KO of one character wins the round and you have the option to switch over to the other character for the next one. Capcom has done something like this in the past with the Rival School series, and other games as well, but I've never been a fan of this. For real, I've always felt that things were handled much better in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, where you need to KO each character of the opposing side in order to win the match. It gives every character a chance to fight, rather than having everything ride on one character for the given round. How it's handled in Capcom Fighting Jam is the former, and it feels super lame. This is especially true when you're in a match where things are super unbalanced and out of your favor, and you can't switch out to your partner. It's a shame because some characters and their mechanics are vastly inferior to others for very stupid reasons. You mean to tell me that I have no answers to anybody using the third strike characters when they have parries? And why does the Darkstalker characters have these one-frame instant super attacks over everybody else? It's just weird seeing how these fighting systems are mashed up together and how terrible the results are. Somebody over there at Capcom straight up wasn't thinking about balance here whatsoever. Something else I should mention though is that the game modes in here are super meager. Like you only get the versus mode, which is when you want to play against a friend. You get the arcade mode when you want to play alone. The training mode when you just want to mess around with characters and learn their moves and stuff, which kind of weird. There's no move list in this game. For whatever reason, they just forgot to add that. But beyond this, you don't have anything else. And then you get the options, which is just kind of there. There's no other, mix-ups with some of the fighting. There's no big team battles that are beyond 2 versus 2. It's just kind of whatever, and it's very disappointing because other versus games, including CVS 2 or Capcom vs. SNK, Marvel vs. Capcom, they have, other stuff that kind of really keeps you playing the game in just different ways. Another thing to mention, too, is that there are unlockable characters in here. You get to unlock Ingrid, Pyron, and also Shin Akuma, which is fine, but it's a real pain in the butt to get some of these characters. In order to get Shin Akuma or Pyron, you have to get a certain amount of perfect victories in the game. You also have to do a certain amount of super special move finishes, which is fine, but they want you to do 3 or 4 of them within a given run, and with how unbalanced this game can be sometimes, it just feels like the cards are just stacked up against you, especially if you pick up certain characters. I mean, what are you supposed to do when you're fighting up against a character that has the parry system from Street Fighter Third Strike, but you can't parry any of their moves? You're just at a complete disadvantage, especially if you're playing as any of the Red Earth characters, which I feel like are at least lower in the totem pole when it comes to the tier list in this game. It's a damn shame. The balance in here is just all over the place, and it makes things like that, like bonus unlockable characters, such a thing that just you can't fully appreciate. So because there's not much else to say about this game, can I recommend that you check out Capcom Fighting Evolution on any console? Absolutely not. This is a very poorly designed and mediocre game that doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do, and that's bring together some of Capcom's best into one big blowout matchup. The balance of the fighting is terrible, and the roster selection could honestly be better throughout. I would have loved to see some other characters represent some of the games that are featured in here, or at least have some additional unlockable ones to build up the roster. But as it stands now, Capcom Fighting Evolution is a very big disappointment. You'll be better off playing any other Capcom crossover game over this one any day. And there you go, everyone. Those are my thoughts about Capcom Fighting Evolution. This game is a huge disappointment. This has to be probably the worst, if not one of the worst versus games that ever come out of Capcom. And I call this a versus game because I know that a lot of people associate that with other stuff like Marvel vs. Capcom and stuff. But I feel like any game that mashes up a bunch of different franchises could be considered a versus game, even though it doesn't have versus in the title. It's just, tomato tomato at that point. But as far as mashup games, quote unquote, this has to be one of the worst. And it really sucks too because I love this concept. Capcom has so many different franchises and series that they could just put together into one big blowout, very similar to what SNK did with Fatal Fury and Art of Fighting, and then we got the King of Fighters. To me, that is awesome, and it keeps it within the company, so you doesn't really have limitations or anything of what you can or cannot use. Capcom has enough to really kind of do something like that, but for whatever reason, this one didn't hit its mark, but I don't want to see this concept go away forever. Regardless though, like any other game that I review on this channel, that's just my opinion about Capcom Fighting Evolution. Let me know your own thoughts about this game down below in the comments section. Tell me, are you a big fan of Capcom Fighters? Do you just love fighting games in general? Are you part of the FGC? What are some of the big mashups or versus games that you want to see, whether it's with or without Capcom, actually happen sometime down the line? At least we're in a point now in gaming where stuff like this, or big things that we never thought was possible, can actually happen. I mean, look at Super Smash Brothers, look at freaking Mortal Kombat, look at Tekken, that just got characters from like random series just showing up now. Like, it's absolutely insane. Talk to me about that stuff down below in the comments section. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching this video. I appreciate your support and all your good vibes as always. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon too to support my channel for new videos each week. You could also join my Patreon for early access to brand new videos and other exclusive content. Don't forget to join my Discord server too and be part of the community I have over here. If you're into games, then you'll love interacting with all the great people who are part of it. Thanks again, guys. Peace out and stay epic, everybody.